Marlon Brando is often considered to be one of the greatest actors in film history, and certainly the most influential. He became a cultural icon for his performances in A Streetcar Named Desire,
Hey, Stella!
On the Waterfront,
I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
The Godfather,
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
and Apocalypse Now. His natural and emotionally raw acting style earned him critical acclaim, helping popularize the concept of method acting, which influenced generations of actors. And he also inspired a wannabe thespian like myself during my short-lived acting career. Good God, what went wrong? Anyway, Marlon Brando is my favorite actor. He's led a fascinating life. Besides just acting in movies, he was also heavily involved in civil rights activism, particularly of Native Americans. He also was a notorious seducer of women. And let's be honest, men too. Rita Moreno and Richard Pryor? Ooh, Marlon, you sly dog. He was a bit reclusive, keeping his life very private from the public and paparazzi, even buying a tiny island in Tahiti, away from the Hollywood scene. He was friends with various people like Michael Jackson, Jack Nicholson, and the guy who voiced Underdog. Also, the dude loved to eat. I could spend hours reading about his dietary habits. Brando would have like a whole honey-baked ham, a tub of ice cream, and several jars of peanut butter for like a snack. What a champ. I idolized him to such a degree that I too would eat a whole jar of peanut butter simply because he did. And, still do occasionally. Of course, I've moved on to the far richer almond butter. This costs $17. I'll watch Marlon Brando in any movie, no matter the quality. And boy, could the quality drop. Calling it merely a bum's life, here is someone who was widely admired by his peers and fans alike of a craft that he couldn't care less about. So how did Marlon Brando end up this way? Let's find out! Transition! Marlon Brando was born in Omaha, Nebraska. Both his mother and father were alcoholics. A lonely child, he yearned for their love and approval, but was often denied, with his father telling him he would not amount to anything. Brando's behavior became rebellious. Poor grades and clashing against authority led him to being expelled from both school and the military academy.
Hey, Johnny, what are you rebelling against?
What do you got?
The one class he was successful in was acting, which was enough for him to continue and pursue as a career. Moving to New York City, Brando learned from acting teacher Stella Adler, herself a student of Konstantin Stanislavski. His teachings of acting internally rather than externally, and giving performances that are naturalistic as opposed to superficial and exaggerated. Adler and other like-minded individuals took these lessons and formed the Group Theater, a collective of actors, directors, and playwrights who expanded on these teachings with their own productions, changing acting forever. Brando deeply admired and respected Stella Adler, crediting her for teaching him how to be real and not force an emotion that he himself did not feel. Marlon Brando quickly found success on Broadway with his breakthrough role as Stanley Kowalski in Tennessee Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire. It tells the story of Southern debutante Blanche Dubois as she moves into the apartment of her sister Stella.
Hey, Stella!
Yeah, her, and her brutish brother-in-law Stanley, who torments her as Blanche's reality crumbles around her. Despite being much younger than as the part was intended, Tennessee Williams was very impressed with Brando's audition and the youthful callousness he brought to the role that humanized him in a way Tennessee Williams hadn't thought of. The drama was a hit! Brando garnered raves for his animalistic magnetism as a force of nature, but also having a complex subtlety and vulnerability. Marlon personally detested the character of Stanley and the toxic masculinity he represented. People would automatically assume, even years later, that he was Stanley Kowalski. That and repeating the same intensity every night was exhausting and mentally draining. Brando couldn't wait to stop playing the part. But hey, the money was pretty good. Once Brando finally curtain called the performance on film, he was launched into superstardom. From 1950 onwards, we enter the Marlon Brando era of cinema, where soon his acting style became the norm. In comparison, the previous acting style seemed antiquated. Brando solidified his fame as an actor and sex symbol in such films as Viva Zapata, The Wild One, Julius Caesar, Guys and Dolls, Sayonara, and On the Waterfront, the last of which he won an Academy Award for Best Actor. In your face, Dan O'Hurley. In On the Waterfront, he plays Terry Malloy, a former boxer who works as a longshoreman for a corrupt union boss. After witnessing a murder by him, he struggles as whether or not to testify on his boss's crimes and clear his guilty conscience. This is probably one of my favorite movies. Yeah, I know the director Elia Kazan's a piece of shit, who used the film as a metaphor to excuse his own actions, ratting out his former innocent colleagues during the Hollywood blacklist, while furthering his own career. But the greatness of the film comes from the story of Brando's character, standing up for what is right in the face of threats and danger, which was something Kazan didn't do. And Brando's just so good in it! The way he improvised, picking up Eva Marie Saint's glove and playing with it in such a natural way. And of course the famous contender scene, which books have been written about. Oddly enough, Brando didn't think much of his performance, calling the part actor-proof, saying the audience does most of the acting themselves. I mean, who doesn't relate to someone who believes they could have been a contender, could have been somebody, had they been dealt different cards by fate? But that identification is exactly why this film's endured for so many years. While in the 50s Brando received praise and accolades, things had changed in the 60s. The financial disaster of Mutiny on the Bounty led Marlon Brando to be labeled as box office poison and was considered washed up. The majority of his roles during this time he simply did for money. To decide how much effort he'd put into a role, he'd sometimes test the director. On the first day of shooting, he would give a deliberately phoned-in reading on the first take of a scene. If the director kept that take, he would know right away. Well, this director's a hack. He wouldn't know a good performance if it bit him in the ass. Well, if he's not gonna care, why should I? Just make sure the check clears. Also, Brando's poor diet started to catch up with him, his weight noticeably growing each passing year, that it became a distraction when filming a movie. War epic Apocalypse Now is infamous for its hellish production. 2 years full of over-budget shooting delays caused by bad weather, cast members suffering heart attacks, leading to enormous pressure on director Francis Ford Coppola, whose entire career was on the line. So when Brando was cast as the insane Colonel Kurtz, Coppola was expecting him to be thin and gaunt, like he was described in the script. And instead, here comes Brando, bloated and completely out of shape. Coppola just said, Jesus Christ, fuck it, just cover his face, film him only in shadows, and maybe no one will notice. God, I hope this works. And fortunately, it did work. That's a great movie, and Brando's great in it. But in regards to acting as a whole, it emphasizes his total I don't give a shit attitude. Marlon Brando gradually grew into the habit of not bothering to memorize lines, preferring instead to have cue cards placed throughout the set, sometimes even attached to the other actors' bodies. Eventually, it got to the point where he'd have an earpiece that an assistant would feed lines to him through via radio. And yeah, he would occasionally repeat broadcasts of traffic reports that got caught in the transmission. It's argued that the spontaneity of not knowing your lines beforehand would help the performance feel closer to real life. Because, unlike stage or film, you don't know ahead of time specifically what you'll say. This doesn't have the veneer of an actor performing. This is the actual character in that moment, therefore more believable. That may be true and work in something intimate and emotionally honest like Last Tango in Paris. But in, say, Christopher Columbus the Discovery? Yeah, that's just pure laziness. When he had his career resurgence with The Godfather, Marlon Brando took advantage of every opportunity when offered a large sum of money. It got ridiculous too. Like, he'd get a huge salary for a 5-minute cameo, and somehow also end up with top billing and a percentage of the box office gross. The thing about Marlon Brando is, he just wasn't crazy about acting. Didn't look down upon it, didn't absorb him. He had other interests. Acting just happened to come across as easy and didn't require much effort. The hours were short and the pay was good. It was always a means to an end. If a studio would pay him to sweep the floor as it did to act, he'd sweep the floor. He compared himself no better or worse than a prostitute, looking to make money any way he can. So that's it, huh? So is there anything you cared about besides cinnamon buns and hot dogs? Well, yes, actually. The one thing Marlon Brando cared about was activism. Marlon Brando was very involved with civil rights activism. He took part in numerous protests for equal rights. Here he is being hassled by a counter-protester with a very classy and very tasteful sign. And he also attended the March on Washington, along with the other left-leaning celebrities of the time. Harry Belafonte, James Garner, Sidney Poitier, Paul Newman, Charlton Heston. Wait a minute. The Gun Nut?
From my cold, dead hands.
Eesh. Talk about a broken clock. Thank God Brando didn't have a conservative heel turn. In fact, he kept on fighting for marginalized groups. Brando was an early supporter of the Black Panther Party. He empathized with those that were oppressed by the racist policies of the American government. With his immense platform, he did everything he could to combat it. And no cause was Marlon Brando more associated with than that of the rights of Native Americans. For centuries, European settlers committed genocidal warfare of starving and massacring native people throughout the Americas. And currently they were still suffering under the U.S. government that had broken every treaty it signed. Indigenous people faced racism and acts of police brutality while enduring mass poverty, unemployment, as well as erasure of their culture and history. Brando got involved with several Native organizations, including the American Indian movement, his profile and financial support bringing a lot of attention and media coverage to them. The public was largely ignorant of the history of abuse and crimes perpetrated on American Indians. Textbooks dismissed them in a couple of paragraphs as a race of faceless, violent heathens. Popular culture had reinforced this idea, none more so than Hollywood movies about the Old West. Stars like John Wayne presented an image of a brave white man battling the godless savages of the frontier. Hollywood needed villains, and it made Indians the embodiment of evil. Which brings us to the 1972 Academy Awards ceremony. Hollywood's annual masturbatory celebration of itself. The Godfather was the year's biggest film, and Brando was favored to win Best Actor for his performance as Don Corleone. Brando long thought giving actors awards in general was a stupid and pointless gesture, and certainly didn't want to celebrate an industry that had systemically misrepresented and maligned American Indians for decades, all while the occupation at Wounded Knee took place. 200 indigenous protesters seized and took over a town in South Dakota to criticize the government's failures and corruption and demanded more equitable treatment. If Brando went to the Oscars to accept a goofy statue, he'd look like an asshole. But Brando realized if he won, it presented the first opportunity to let an American Indian speak in front of 6 million people watching. A little payback for years of defamation by Hollywood. So he asked his friend, activist Sacheen Littlefeather, to attend the ceremony in his place and to read a statement that refused the Oscar, denouncing Hollywood's racist treatment of Native Americans. The producers refused to let her read the speech, but in Brando method style, she was able to improvise a few words on behalf of the American Indian.
That he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award, or the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry,
John Wayne was pissed. Brando and Littlefeather had ruined Hollywood's fantasy with a little reality. And this sums up Marlon Brando perfectly. He didn't care about awards. He didn't care about acclaim. What he cared about was helping his fellow man. Ugh. Fellow man? Jesus, Ian, what are you trying to win an Oscar?
He also really liked to eat. I can't stress that enough.
2 chickens and a bag of cookies for lunch? 2 steaks and 2 apple pies for dinner? Whoa. He ate a frog? Holy shit.
Oh, that is terrible. That's the most appalling, disgusting, revolting thing I've ever seen.
Okay, this is getting weird. Night, everybody.
Luck be a lady tonight. Luck be a lady tonight. Lucky if you've ever been a lady to begin with. Luck be a lady tonight.